This review was prepared by Dinara Davlembayeva and Savas Papagiannidis and published by TheoryHub. TheoryHub covers a wide range of theories and acts as a starting point for theory exploration in different research and teaching and learning contexts. This is a review of the social influence theory. Social influence theory explains the impact of social influence on individuals through three processes of influence acceptance, namely compliance, identification, and internalization, and considers the conditions necessary for these processes to occur. Social influence theory, SIT, was originally formulated by Herbert Kellman in the early 1950s as the framework explaining the conditions under which social influence induces attitude or behavior change. The theory was developed against the backdrop of significant social and political upheavals, exemplified by civil rights movements and anti-war protests. The socio-political climate change brought to the fore the contradictory phenomena in which people could conform to social norms and rules whether or not they believed in their legitimacy. However, prior research on social influence was inadequate to explain the underlying processes of collective persuasion and the translation of social compliance into attitude and behavior change. Although evidence existed about the predictors of conformity, the intricate nature of attitude changes stimulated by a particulate type of communication lacked a theoretical explanation. Dissatisfied with the ability of the preceding theories to explain contradictory responses to social pressures and social norms, in social influence theory, Kellman analyzed different types of influence situations and associated responses. Social influence theory was inspired by the intellectual foundations of three streams of research laying the basis for analyzing different motivational grounds for attitude change. These streams included the literature on conformity and social dynamics, cognitive dissonance, consistency research, and the functional theories of attitude. Kellman built upon research on conformity and social dynamics that had investigated the personal conditions that make people conform or resist pressures in social groups, such as political propaganda and general public opinion. Cognitive dissonance, consistency research provided a point of reference to suggest that attitude and behavior change happens against the backdrop of discrepancies between the existing attitudes and new cognitions. In a pursuit to downplay these discrepancies, individuals would either resist or make a change in the existing system of beliefs and values. The observations on the consistency of cognitions helped formulate the two opposing forces necessary for influence acceptance. These forces include new information communicated by an influencing agent, manifested as the exertion of influence, and an inherent inclination of people towards stability, which counterforces the permeation of the new information in the existing system of beliefs and values. Finally, Kellman drew on the functionalists' views, which emphasizes that an individual changes attitudes not only to reduce the discrepancy between existing beliefs and the induced behavior, but also because the individual is motivated to engage in that behavior. This is because the induced behavior has implications for self-evaluation and the ability to maintain social relations. As such, the motivational power of the induced behavior depends on the degree to which the individual is oriented towards self-development, growth, new learning, and self-utilization. To go beyond a mere understanding of the motivation for attitude and behavior change, Kellman's social influence theory aimed to expand knowledge on several fronts. First, it aimed to shed light on the structure of social situations to explain the generic processes that are required for the induction of behavior. Second, the theory aimed to distinguish between the different modes of influence acceptance by drawing on the differences in situational premises in which influence is attempted. As such, through social influence theory, Kellman sought to explain the qualitative distinctions of different modes of individuals' responses to a social influence and the relative importance of those modes for long-term behavior change. Social influence theory postulates that there are three modes of social influence acceptance, namely compliance, identification, and internalization. Kalman defined social influence as a behavior change within the social settings induced by one person or a group of people. Compliance, identification, and internalization represent the responses to social influences that can be best viewed as the outcomes of the dynamic processes of interaction with an influencing agent in an informational and motivational context. To understand the difference between compliance, identification, and internalization, Kalman proposed a structure of generic social influence situations from the perspective of the person towards whom the influence is elicited. For an influence to have an effect on its recipient, first, an influencing agent provides information in a deliberate or unintentional attempt to induce behavior. Deliberate induction of behavior takes the form of direct commands, such as threats, requirements, orders, or persuasion. Unintentional induction can be an indirect expression of expectations, thoughts, and norms. To minimize resistance to social influence, the information about induced behavior should convince an individual that the adoption of induced behavior, although challenging an existing system of beliefs and attitudes, is conducive to the achievement of an individual's goals. Second, a person evaluates the characteristics of an influencing agent, which may be social status, expertise, prestige, values, available resources, and other attributes. The influencing agent is evaluated in terms of how powerful the agent is in creating the required conditions for goal achievement. By deriving meaning from the attributes and communication of influencing agents, individuals can assess the relevance of the behavior of the influencing agents to the achievement of personal goals. Characteristics that resonate with the individual signal favorable conditions for goal achievement, ensure a positive orientation toward the influencing agent, and enhance predisposition towards the adoption of the induced behavior. Hence, the factor amplifying the likelihood that agent evaluation will translate into positive orientation towards the agent is the strength of their perceived power. Third, an individual forms an understanding of a precise course of action for the behavior to be implemented. The induction of behavior is conditioned by its prepotency. Prepotency is the extent to which induced behavior is considered the most clearly relevant that has been activated in the influence situation. In other words, the stronger and the more relevant the induced behavior compared to other available alternatives, the more chances are that behavior will be induced. The difference in the importance of induced behavior, the power sources of an influencing agent, and the manner in which the induced behavior has become prepotent contribute to the variance in behavioral responses to the social influence. Changes in behavior can be manifested through either of the three routes, namely, compliance with the influence, identification with an influencing agent, or internalization of the induced behavior. Compliance is the acceptance of influence for individuals to receive rewards and avoid punishments for non-compliant behavior. Compliance is a response to external demands motivated by concerns about the social ramifications of that behavior. Examples of such behavior include abiding by laws and the prescriptions of a doctor. Identification is a social influence with the purpose of achieving self-definite goals. Like compliance, the adoption of behavior following identification does not manifest individuals' personal values, but it is intrinsically satisfying. For example, individuals can be nudged into the consumption of sustainable products under the expectation that identification with green consumerism helps sustain membership in respective social groups. Influence internalization is an act of adopting behavior because it is construed as being congruent with personal values and views, such as deeply entrenched beliefs and attitudes about social conduct, norms, and idealized images. Such beliefs, values, and attitudes usually work as self-guiding principles nurtured early on in people's lives under the influence of the social environment the person grew up in. For decades, social influence theory guided studies across various disciplines. Initially, its application was predominantly seen in organizational, medical, and socio-political studies. For example, it was used to understand the impact of authority on employee compliance, the factors inherent to the social environment influencing health-destructive and health-protective behaviors, the perception of power and the legitimacy of actions, stigmatization and dynamics in interracial interactions. In the past 2 decades, along with the unfaded interest in the social influence phenomenon within organizational and larger social systems, the application of the theory has also expanded in the domains of marketing and information system management. Despite the wide applications of social influence theory, it also garnered critique around its lack of acknowledgement of contextual factors, its inability to differentiate the intentionality of influences and associated behavioral responses, and insufficient attention to the role of power dynamics in social influence situations and cognitive processes of persuasion. In particular, researchers emphasize the need to explore the contextual differences of situations affecting variance in social influence effects. Other scholars contended that the theory does not account for the variations in social influence processes across different cultures. Also, the theory was criticized for the lack of explicit distinctions between intentional and unintentional influences, which limited the understanding of the types of potential behavioral responses that unintentional influences may entail. Finally, it has been argued that, in an attempt to cover the broader scope of responses to social influences, social influence theory provides an insufficient explanation of the cognitive processes underscoring communication persuasion. Thank you for listening. To download the full review or to read other theory reviews, visit open.ncl.ac.uk.